Welcome to the Ring of Fire Con. I'm Jody Lynn Nye, and welcome to the Women in the New Timeline panel. I'm a new convert edition writer in the 1632 universe. So I think that the people who are joining me this evening have much more experience than I do, and I look forward to our discussion. So if my fellow panelists will introduce themselves, let's start with the longest serving member of the 1632 universe, Virginia DeMarce. Would you go ahead, please?
Thank you, Jody. I'm Virginia DeMarce. I have been involved since I first read 1632, the novel, and began as a historical consultant mainly, since I'm a professional historian with my degree in early modern European history, specializing in Germany. Then Eric decided I should write. So I have written to some extent about women, not specifically about women. Probably my mantra to the other writers has constantly been, really there are two. One is England was not the gold standard, and the other is rank always trumps gender.
Okay. Natalie Silk, an old friend from Chicago.
I've begun writing for the 1632 series after, I would say, about 5 years of getting lumps and bumps in the literary world, and I would refuse to listen to one of my fellow writers saying, this is a really good, really good company to write for. And I said, nah, never, I'll never write for them. I'll never write for them. I don't want to be stuck in writing one particular genre. I'm very happy I'm writing for them. I am so thrilled because now I can tell all my family stories in one platform.
Fantastic. Ann Keener.
Yes, I'm probably one of the newer people on the panel. I've been writing for about the past 3 years or so. It has been my practice writing, usually averaging about a story a year or so, just because life happens. I have 2 kids, so that makes things interesting. But I find just a great universe to write for, a great way to get into writing that's really helped cement me is enjoying writing and helped me get into writing as a hobby and even starting to pursue more sort of well, at least freelance writing editing as a career.
Okay, and Tracy S. Morris.
Okay, so I co-write for about a decade now. I've co-written short stories that have appeared in the Grantville Gazettes with Bradley H. Sinar. And we started at a convention. We met Paula Goodwood, who was the editor at the time for the Grantville Gazettes, and she was very encouraging to us. And so we started writing together, and we've had 5 or 6 stories, I think, in the Gazettes. And right now we're looking at possibly collecting them into an anthology with a couple of new, never before seen short stories and a novella for the Ring of Fire Press. And so the Dennis and Betsy stories are about 2 reporters who work for the Grantville Times and also on the side write short stories for the local tabloid newspaper, the Grantville Inquisitor. And some of the misadventures of Dennis and Betsy as they collect these stories. And it's a lot of fun to write because they're humorous, and Betsy is sort of the I Love Lucy of the Grantville universe.
Fabulous.
That sounds like so much fun.
Oh, they're a hoot to write.
It's such a broad universe now. It's getting larger all the time. It's mushrooming. So how did you get involved? Did you approach Eric Flint? Did you begin with starting to write a story? Did you read some of the material and say, I can do this better? Or did you find a hole in the series that you thought that you could fill well? Let's start with Anne.
Well, for me, I was a barfly for a while with some ideas, and then just reading the materials, reading the different gazettes, and then one day I had an idea in my head that came up, and I thought no one had read this. It's some historical characters no one has used, but they're known. And it was also a little bit of revenge, I'll admit, because I was getting ticked off at being paywalled for a research article. So I created I started writing about the Elsevier family, the historical one that the modern publisher is named after, and so the idea is how would they feel knowing that there's this company with their name, their printer's markered logo, but it's not them. They don't own anything, but there are tons of articles from them in the Granville libraries. How would that feel? To know there's that, to know that's you but not you.
Did you
And
bring a completed story into this, or did you?
I wrote the story. I started on the bar. So I wrote it on the bar, submitted and slushed it, and that's how I got started. Was this bar and the 1632 slush, which I think is a great way to get started and get feedback. And I'd been giving feedback there before. I've been tried my own hand at it.
Mm-hmm. Virginia, when you read the first novel, what was your next step?
My next step was that I went and found Baines Bar and said, hey, I really enjoy this. And I hung around for a while. And every now and then I would drop in a book or a bibliographical reference, or then Eric and a bunch of us started playing. This was back when the bar was considerably more fun, with one of those spontaneous, everybody does a little bit of a story. And when he was going to do the first Ring of Fire anthology, he told me to write a story about Gretchen's grandmother, Veronica Richter, Grandma Richter. So I wrote a story, and he accepted it, and probably, therefore, I have had one of the oddest writing careers in anyone's history, since I have, up till now, not written anything that he hasn't bought, and I haven't ever written fiction for anything else.
It's a good place to write fiction for.
It
Natalie, you weren't going to write for it. You weren't going to do it. So
no one could convince me otherwise. After I was in the middle of one of my lumps and bumps, when I was approached and said, you know, you really need to write for us. So I did. I half-heartedly spewed words down, sent it in, and it was sent back, you know, mauled, sent back, and said, do it again. I said, okay. So I reworked it. And yeah, this is great.
Terrific.
But
Okay.
I agree with what Anne said. I still slush all my stories on the bar. It's the best place to get quick feedback on, you have a great big plot hole here, or you're using somebody that someone else was using and just didn't happen to catch it. I think it's a wonderful methodology.
But it was one of my favorite family stories, and way back, I would love to tell the story if I may. Okay, so way back in the 50s, where people of a certain faith and people of a certain color were not permitted in certain places. They were pretty limited in where they could vacation. So Miami was a really big hot spot for people of a certain faith to go because they were not harassed. So my uncle, my aunt, and their friends would go to Miami back in the 50s, and they're on the beach, relaxing, enjoying themselves, and they're having fresh squeezed orange juice. And my uncle's friend said, you know, wouldn't it be great to have fresh squeezed orange juice all the time, especially in winter? I have an idea. You and I, we'll go 50-50. It'll be about 25,000, and we'll get 2 refrigerated trucks. Squeeze orange juice here, freeze the orange juice, ship it up to New York. And as one truck is coming down, another one will go up. And my uncle said, you know, buddy, I would love to do that, but I have 3 little ones and my wife will kill me. So what are you going to call your company? Minute Maid?
Good heavens.
And my aunt, we told the story so many times, and she said, to this day, I cannot bring a glass of Minute Maid to my lips. And I think to her dying day, she never drank a Minute Maid product.
And did that inspire your story?
That was my first story. 2 men walk into a beer garden, and
Yeah, I remember that story because I remember seeing on the slush and like, I see your story. It's like, I now know your stories. I know exactly which story that is.
Wonderful. Tracy, I have not forgotten about you. How did you start out? What got you involved?
I hadn't been on and around the bar. That was my partner, Brad Sinar, handled that half of the writing for so long, and he's had some health challenges, so I've had to get more proactive in that part of the partnership. But like I said, we met with Paula and she really encouraged us. So I started out trying to find out as much as I could, and there was the Bain Free Library, so I absorbed all of those stories like a sponge, the first novel and the first couple of anthologies. And we sat down and we were talking about what kind of story we wanted to write. And I'm like, they've already got a very established canon, and we're going to have to be very careful not to contradict that, because if we get something wrong, you know, anybody who reads that and is fanatical about this universe will eat us alive. And so we decided that we were going to try to make our stories as far away from what's already established as possible. And so if the main story is going on over here, we're going to be over here doing our own thing. And so that there's a lot of freedom in that. And I thought, this is going to be so amazing. I'm going to have so much freedom. And then I wrote Betsy as being incredibly pop culture savvy. Well, that I never foresaw that was going to create a whole lot of other research, because not only did I have to determine what she would have known as far as what happened prior to the year they went back in time. I could not reference anything that came after. But now it's been 20 years of current pop culture has passed since she's gone back in time. So I have to make sure not to slip in anything that would have happened afterwards. So there's a whole culture of slang and pop culture memes and internet that she should not know anything about. So it's created a whole lot of extra work.
You have to be very careful not to put in anachronisms in a whole way.
Both ways.
Deal with that. In one of my stories, I referenced, "Oh brother, how art thou?" And somebody pointed out, "Oh no, it was 4 months after the Ring of Fire."
Yeah.
So close.
Well, the first Dennis and Betsy story, I was trying to reference a movie called The Brotherhood of the Wolf, which that movie is set in France and deals with some real wolf attacks that terrorized that universe. Well, the movie came out, I think 9 months after they would have gone back. So I had to go back and say, oh, well, she knew it was going to be made because she followed cinema. And had to make that little cheat just to make it work.
That's a great fudge. The next question, of course, is what is your setting? Where are your stories taking place? I'll ask you first because you're talking.
The nice thing about having Dennis and Betsy being roving reporters is we don't have to nail it down. So, for example, we can start out, Dennis's cousin runs a chocolate shop, and she also runs the Inquisitor. So we will often set the opening of it either in the chocolate shop or in the offices of the newspaper, the Grantville Gazette, or the Grantville Times, I think is the actual one. And we may set it there, but then they've got a story they've got to go, so they've got to go track it down. So they've been in France, they've been in the Basque countries, they've been in and around the USC. And the stories that I'm writing now, that for the new stories I'm writing now for the proposed anthology for Ring of Fire Press, I've got them wandering around in Italy.
Fun.
Yeah.
Okay, that means, again, researching the travel.
Oh, yeah.
All the other fun things. Virginia, where do your stories tend to take place? I'm sure that since you've written so much, that they're all over, but where did you begin, and where have you moved to?
I began with the Grandma Richter story, of course, and that was set in Grantville itself. The second thing I did was perpetrate the first Lutheran theological colloquy in science fiction history, which took place in Rudolstadt, which was about 8 miles away. Then I wrote with Eric on the Ram Rebellion, and that took place in Franconia, both because something was happening in Franconia in the story and because I did a year at the University of Erlangen when I was much younger. So I had walked a great deal around Franconia on my very own and knew what it looked like. So then we did the Bavarian Crisis. Then I've done a sequence to carry out Eric's early proclamation that Lotharingia shall rise again, which goes from Alsace up through Lorraine, Bernhardt's Burgundy, and up there to make a buffer zone between the USC and France to head off the possibility of world wars in the modern sense insofar as possible by creating this snaky serpent along the Rhine.
Mm-hmm.
And basically I write pretty well wherever I want to. At the moment, I'm going to be having Mark Cavriani and his girlfriend Susanna in 2 different places in Italy. It just depends on where the stories take me. I'm retired, I live by myself, I research, I write.
Okay. Anne, where do your stories take place?
My stories are mostly Germany or Granville. My first story was set in Leiden. The second one had started in Leiden, then had the characters go to Jena because they're from the Elsevier family. They're looking for an apprenticeship, and because they family was in the Latin trade, they now obviously go where there's a university because that's what they know. And they picked Jena because it's close enough to get the Granville technology, which is what they want to learn, and how it would affect their printing. And then other stories have been set in. 2 of my stories are actually one is a mix of Jena and Bavaria, Jena and Prague. Although most of the stories set in Jena with a Prague segment as a framing device. The other one is, actually, I think most of my stories wound up being in Jena and a touch of Granville here and there. So Jena's been a bit heavy in my stories.
Okay. Natalie, where does your frozen orange juice story take place, and where have you written since?
I'm with Tracy. I made up my own town. If something's happening over there, I figured out, okay, maybe I need to create my own town. So I looked at the map of where Grantville may have been, and I looked at the map of Poland and Germany, and I made up my town of Zauberstadt. So that somewhere near Grantville.
Okay. Well, we are the women of the new timeline, but what women characters have you introduced to it, and have you in fact made male characters just as important? Anne, what about you?
I've done a mix. One of my most recent characters was definitely a very important female character. I'm, of course, I'm blanking on the name, my most recent work was an uptime female woman who is married to a downtime man. I'm blanking on the name, of course, because that's
you're on
what
camera.
because I'm on camera, of course. But so that's where I first worked with. Well, that was one of my most time working with a female character. The other time I worked with a female character was briefly during A Printer's Dream, where I got to introduce an actual historical person who was running one of the print shops in Jena when the Grand Mario Fire actually happened. Like in that time in Jena, basically her husband died. Her son was, I think, in his training to be a printer, but not able to run the shop, so she took over. And so that was a fun character to include at least a scene with, of this woman who is a businesswoman. She is acting as a master printer.
Wonderful.
Which was fun.
Tracy, your two reporters are women. Are there more women that they interact with? Are any of them actual historical figures?
Well, Dennis and Betsy, it's a man and a woman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They're partners, and they interact with both men and women alike. I invented one character, and she was loosely from Venice and interested in printing, and she had to leave because of legal issues, and so to travel to get to the USC, she dressed as a boy, cut her hair, wore men's clothing, and she decided she liked the freedom, and so she just kept on being a boy. And it's like once she got there, everybody knows she's a girl. She just prefers to present herself as a boy, and that's just her. And so she was fun to write because she was a reader and she read everything. And so this was a whole forensic CSI type of mystery we wrote, and everything. She was the brains of the whole caper because she had read so much. She could do the chemistry and so much. So she was a lot of fun. And we've done, Brad likes to find historical figures, and so with different stories he did, and then he would work his stories into what we were doing together. We had the historical character that D'Artagnan was based on, and we had Cyrano de Bergerac was one of our characters. So it was fun.
Natalie, tell me about your female characters.
My story started out with two men, and it grew from there. The wives, the wife who's Dora, is very much a combination of my grandmother and my aunt. Very strong, for the times that they were born in. Now I'm getting away from happy homemaker to another character, Anya, who comes from Spain. She's young. She sees women walking around in short skirts and shorn hair, and she's going to be just like them.
Virginia, tell me about your characters.
Well, I would say that I have been writing men and women more or less on a 50-50 basis for the sheer reason that that's the way they come in history. It's difficult to write anything with some verisimilitude without handling both. Most of the women I've been dealing with have something to do with political administration, and most of them have been historical characters whom I'm using in the plots. So Claudia de Medici, the Abbess of Quedlinburg, it's really difficult not to present them as effective and strong characters because that's what they were, one way or the other. I haven't invented many female characters. I did invent Susanna Allegretti for the simple reason that in Bavarian Crisis, Eric insisted that every novel must have a pair of young lovers, whether it needed it or not, in my opinion. So I created Mark Cavriani and Susanna Allegretti. She's a court seamstress, just basically finishing her journeyman, as Gorg says, Virginia, do you have to make her such a clothing snob? And I said, yes, she was a clothing snob. The last thing she's going to do is be interested in starting a ready-to-wear line. She's looking for a court where she can demonstrate her full-blown talents, and she's not likely to compromise about it one way or the other.
She's going to be a couturier, not just off the rack.
And
No,
whether, that's the popular thing to do or not, she's a very stubborn young woman. I think we forget so often that in a vocation, occupation such as court seamstress, basically she's been on her own since she was 14. She's been apprenticed, but she's been making her way first in Vienna, then in Bavaria, then in Brussels, basically without family or backing. She's been learning her trade. And young women in the trades that they followed did that just as much as men did, except that they didn't do the formal journeyman kind of thing. But, these were not, the main thing we have to keep in mind is that this was not the Victorian English middle class.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, there was not that kind of ethos yet. So that you're writing people who are not rebelling against it because it hasn't happened. They are not going to go around muttering, girls, what was that classical line in The Tough Got to Fantasyland? Girls can too herd dinosaurs. It's not just that's not the 17th century mentality yet, because basically women did, like your printer's widow, whatever they needed to. There's a printer's widow in Bamberg in one of my stories, basically doing the whole same thing, holding a much smaller shop together until her sons are old enough to take over it. And basically, in a lot of ways, widows had a considerable amount of legal and economic power.
And there were many professions also that fell to women quite frequently, and it's reflected in the names like Webster and Brewster, where the T appears, it was a woman.
Yes, and one thing we have to realize is that the two areas at the time where women were highly disadvantaged were the learned professions, because universities were not open to them, although there were alternative ways of obtaining education at that level. The other was government administration below the level of the ruling families. You by and large did not have women as government clerks, as scribes, that type of thing. They could work as private secretaries and did, but they would not be usually in the civil service unless in some way employed, as I have one of my characters employed by Claudia de Medici, running her errands around from one court to another. But that's because she needs entree into dealing with the women in the other courts. But basically, those were the two areas that were most closed out, and where I really think we have not shown yet quite how surprised the downtimers on the average would be in Grantville if they walked into the circuit court or the probate court and discovered that 3/4 of the employees were women. That would be startling.
I think it would be refreshing for them. You say rank trumps gender, and I think that's absolutely true. When you have an abbess or a noblewoman, she would be able to take precedence.
Yes.
What are some of the examples you can give of where you bring that out in your stories?
Well, of
Claudia
course,
de Medici, for example?
well, in the whole area of Burgundy, where I have Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar and Claudia de Medici, when Bernhard is going through that siege of atypical plague and is down and out for 3 months up in Lorraine, who organizes everything to keep Burgundy going for him? His wife. She tells his generals, she tells his colonels, she tells his civil servants, she tells his judges. She has the rank.
She is Eleanor Roosevelt,
Yeah.
in a way. These are all wonderful characters to read about, men and women alike. But I'm very excited about the ones that I have been reading. But we are also engaged in writing for what is a science fiction series. So what innovations have you introduced to this series? To what have you brought to the 17th century from the 20th or 21st? And I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think in Birthing Pains, one of the things I bring up is for the 17th century is the knowledge of the 20th century view of a C-section. In the 17th century, that is a death sentence. In the 20th century, it's survivable. And so that complete conflict of how characters would view that is one of the things I brought into a story. Because for a downtimer, being told you need a C-section is, wait, you're saying I'm dying? Because that's what it was. It's a last-ditch attempt to save the baby if the mother was dying. Whereas now it's a major surgery, but it's normal. So write a story from the point of view of a downtime husband and uptime wife, where the wife is an uptimer. She was married before, 2 kids. One of them was a C-section, so she's looking at a more dangerous labor because it's after a C-section. So both of them deal with the fears and the fact that they're not quite the same, and also that difference in opinions. Because the wife in jail just doesn't want to do with a C-section, where her husband is trying to, even though he works with this area, get over just what he knows versus what he learned.
Well, there's a revelation in every story, so that's obviously his. That's an interesting one, bringing in modern medicine.
Yes, because this part of it is like, yes, it's miraculous to downtimers, but at the same time, there's limitations, and there's also areas where there's potential for just misunderstanding. Because again, it's something like a C-section. To us, it's like, oh, that's just one of the options of giving birth. To them, it's like, what? You want to what? You'll kill the white lady. The idea of surgery being survivable is a new thing, especially surgery to essentially the midsection, which is considered lethal up to modern era, up to until at least the late 1800s, it was considered lethal.
Well, that's a good one. Natalie, what have you brought to the 17th century?
Refrigeration.
Aha! And how is it accomplished with such primitive materials?
I fudge it, because the 1632 series already established refrigeration. I also introduced transporting frozen orange juice back and forth, but via train. It was never thought of. And transporting oranges back and forth. Oranges came from, at that time, it came from Spain, and by the time they reached Germany, they'll be pretty much mush, if anything, if they survived transit. But I introduced how to preserve oranges and how to get orange juice.
Have you invented for them or produced for them 20th century equivalents of juice squeezers?
Not yet.
Oh, I'm waiting for that then.
I just said, just allude to it when I introduce the actual shop where everything is going on.
Okay. Tracy.
I don't think I'm the first to do this, but my characters have done some modern forensic science. So for an example, they have a suspected serial poisoner, and so they pack up their gear and they throw their their ramshackle, hey, we're gonna make you the CSI investigator because you know chemistry, and they throw her in the wagon and they take off for the town and run around collecting samples and having her do the tests. And so it's all very ham-fisted because my characters are kind of ham-fisted characters, but eventually they get the results thanks to the science.
Shades of Pudd'nhead Wilson.
Oh yes.
I think that would have been a lot of fun for it. How are these innovations received, or are they seen at all as witchcraft or something that would be suspicious?
I don't think so, because everything I've read and everything that I've researched, it's a very, this is getting through the tail end of the Age of Enlightenment, and so a lot of the attitudes are like, oh, it's science we don't understand, but it's science, and so we accept it. I'll accept in some of the most backwater places where that line of thinking hasn't soaked in and permeated yet.
Mm-hmm. Virginia, what have you brought to the 17th century in terms of innovations? Could be social, could be actual technology.
I'm not a widgets and gadgets person. So basically they don't get widgets and gadgets to me. What they get is intellectual contamination.
Good.
What
kinds?
Well, for instance, I am having, again, I'll go to Susanna Allegretti since she's my story in progress at the moment. She goes down to visit the family of her mother and stepfather in Florence and encounters the reality that Mediterranean culture was very different from European culture north of the Alps, where she has been throughout her formative years for nearly a decade. Plus, she has spent nearly a year in the household of Duke Henri de Rohan and his uptime female employees in Besançon, and picked up a lot of concepts from them. And she looks at the custom of Florence at the time of putting all surplus daughters for whom one could not afford a dowry into nunneries, and says, oh, look, guys, I'm Catholic, but that's just sick. The idea of women not having options. Mm-hmm. And Grantville would have been in a much more alien environment if it had landed in Iberia or the Italian peninsula, to tell the truth. The cultures were far more different. So basically that kind of thing, and I'm basically best having ideas floating around among people who will come to be influential, which is why Iona Nelson decided, yes, I'll accept that job teaching music at the Abbey of Quedlinburg's School and Junior College for Girls. I could stay here and teach people in Grantville who already know everything I know. I think I'll just go away at the invitation of the abbess and spread my ideas among girls who otherwise wouldn't hear it, who will go out into the best families of the nation.
That's very true.
And shorten their hair and raise their skirts.
Well, no, this is one of the eras of history in which short hair was fashionable. I had to get this across to people early, but if you look at the pictures, portraits of women at the time, short hair was fashionable for women in the 1630s. One of the few European eras where it was. Also, basically for most people, except for practical purposes, no head coverings were required in Northern Europe at this time by fashion and custom. So basically the skirts depends on what you're doing. As I talked once to a woman who works with 30-year war reenactments, and she said one of her great frustrations was that women at the time who were going to be doing things like working in kitchens or farmyards wore their skirts at most mid-calf, no longer than that, simply to keep them from getting filthy. If you look at illustrations of working women in Venice at the period, that's where their skirts fall. But she said we had authentic clothing that camp followers should be wearing, and nobody would believe it. So we had to lengthen our skirts just to keep the hassle down.
Because everyone assumes the Victorian era where things must be long is how things were, but it's not.
It is not.
Yeah, because like
it has
Victorian era,
changed again and again, and we know what the Victorians tell us more than anything else.
Well, even my grandmother was born in 1871, and she said, you know, it's ridiculous, this idea that Victorian men didn't see women's ankles unless they went to a burlesque show. She said, just to cross the street in Columbia, Missouri, in the mud and the manure, we picked up our skirts and we hiked them up to hip length before we went anywhere near one of those streets, or they would have ended up just gooky.
That brings me to one of the most interesting questions, at least to me, is research. Now, Virginia, you are a tremendous researcher and you are an expert in the field. So let me ask you first, and then I will ask the other ladies about their practices and where their sources come from.
Well, I'm an academic. I'm an unashamed academic. And basically what you are seeing behind me is my immediate working library for the 1632 series. Basically, I focus insofar as I can on local history, collected correspondence, original documents. I'm the book that Walt Boys has now is on the province of Westphalia, where Frederick of Denmark was appointed to be governor by the Congress of Copenhagen. And, you know, I say in the back of it, Frederick was a very taciturn man. He wrote little, he said less. So for the communications I do between him and his private secretary, I use the private correspondence of his father, Christian IV, as a writing model, because Christian had two long-term confidential secretaries, one for German affairs, one for Danish affairs, and he wrote memos to them all the time, and he did write a great deal. And since we know that Christian and Frederick were on good terms all the time, most of the time at any rate, I expect his were much like his father's, so that's what I'm using. I use the correspondence of Amalie Elizabeth for the Landgravine of Hesse, and I extrapolated that for the way her sister might write, although I could find nothing about the way her sister might write. I rely very heavily on original correspondence.
How did you obtain translations?
What?
How did you obtain translations?
I usually use them in the original language.
Oh, in German and Danish and Swedish? Wow.
Swedish, not so much, but I can make Danish. My grandparents, my mother's parents, were both from the northern coastal region of Germany and spoke two versions of Platt, very different, so much that they had to speak to one another in the Hochdeutsch they learned in school because their Platt was mutually incomprehensible. But basically, if you know German and English and Dutch, you can make sense out of Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
If you know Latin, French, and Spanish, you can make sense out of Italian and Portuguese. You
And
can,
Romanian.
to a considerable extent, though I haven't had to use Romanian for this yet. Once one gets out of the Central European linguistic area, I have to get help if I want Polish or Russian or Finnish or something like that. Luckily, I have a son who reads and speaks Russian, and usually I can get someone to help me for something. But mostly I just use them in whatever language they're in.
Where do you reach out to find these materials? Because you have a tremendous number of resources there and very enviable. But how did you get them and where do they come from? Who do you ask?
I just look them up from the standard academic publishers by topic. I subscribe to a half dozen periodicals, professional historical periodicals. They have book reviews. I just note down things that might be of potential interest. You know, it's just standard academic research.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing that I wouldn't be doing for nonfiction if I were still writing academic stuff.
Well, this is of tremendous interest to our viewers because if they aspire to write for 1632, I'm trying to give them a heads up as to where they can start looking. So academic journals and academic libraries and publishers?
Yes, basically, or go on Bain's Bar and say, hey, I want to know something about this. Where can I find the data? And we'll be happy to tell you. That's one of the functions of the 1632 Tech Forum is people come and say, does anybody know, well, this was just a couple of weeks ago, who was on the ground as an authority in the Bari area of Italy in 1636? And within 2 days, he knew who was on the ground as an authority figure in Bari, Italy in 1636.
Wonderful.
We're a community. It really is a community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very glad of that too. Natalie, where's your research come from?
Since I'm relatively a newbie, my local library, that has always served me. And because I incorporate botany in my stories now, I go to my handy dandy Chicago Botanical Garden library and I make friends.
I miss the Chicago Botanic Garden. I've not been there in a while. My family's Chicago, so I go there up there a decent amount.
My dad lives across the street from it, or did until 2 weeks ago. And where's your research coming from?
I have a slightly different approach. I do a lot of online search, so I'll do a lot of Google, particularly through Google Scholar, to find if I'm looking for someone or looking for something, to find it that way. Like when I was looking for printers who were active in Jena in the right time period, that's how I found them. And really just Googling or looking for like a nobleman story I'm working on that's kind of on the back burner, but where I need someone who's basically nobility of the belt at the time, but would want something to be like a prestigious gift. How do you find someone that would be historical to fit that time period? So I'm not as hardcore as Virginia, but then again, I only know English and a bit of Latin. But I tend to do a little bit more. I tend to do a little bit more online research, but I do try to use. I do have an academic background, though mine's more biology. Still use those sort of skills to figure out, parse which sources are actually useful versus which ones are not. I just tend more towards Google.
Okay, Tracy, where's your research come from?
Well, I start with Google as well, and I will craft my search as specific as I can so that I can get the search results that match what I'm looking for. And then the pages that pull up, I look at their footnotes. And what I'm looking for is an original source of first, blanking on it, as close to the original document as I can find. So I'm looking for books, I'm looking for interviews, anything like that. And then after I have that, I use interlibrary loan. My local librarian is fantastic. If I can't find something through my local library or I can't get it fast enough, I'll look at thrift books and see if they can't get it to me within a couple days. Used books on Amazon. If it's expensive, interlibrary loan is the best source. But that's basically the thread I follow.
Okay. So what's next for you in the 1632 universe? What are you writing now? What ideas have you got that are coming up? Natalie?
I'm going to explore Anya. She's a new character who came from Spain. She's a niece. She was a toss-away niece, basically. She was too unruly for her new stepmother to control. And her father decided that she would do very well in the Nohan household. Of course, she ended up cutting her hair and rebelling as any teenage girl will do. But my next story will be how she branches out into the community. Of course, the story that I wrote for Anya, it ended up where she popped a local boy in the face because he wanted to get a peek up a little higher than her ankles.
And well, she should. And what's next for you?
I've got two stories I'm working on. One which I'm working on right now is based on an idea I had been in my head for a while of how would people react, how would downturners react when Granville has its first cicada outbreak. Because it's Granville, they're going to get periodical cicadas. I believe they're going to get periodical cicadas eventually. I had a little bit of argument on the bar when I asked about this if people thought they would survive. My argument is that if they can survive in Chicago, they should be able to survive in 1630s winter and survive in the ground there. And I was doing some research. I first shelved it because I realized that the last outbreak in the Mannington area would have been actually around 1999, so it would be a while since that had happened. But I just made up a story where the characters are learning that Granville has these, and that it's due in 1646, 1647, and the little misconceptions that come along the way with wait, you get regular cicadas, you get regular locusts. It's like no, and like the little misunderstanding. So that's one story, and another story I have that we're in progress is to continue the Elsevier saga, and this one is going to set up sort of introduce major female character into the saga, and also it's supposed to be a bit of a mystery, in which case of book theft or book piracy in the time period, which was very common. Actually, it was very, very common for printers to steal their books, other people's books. It's actually how the Elseviers made their name. They stole a lot of books out of French publishing houses and would print them cheaper, but decent quality.
Oh, that'll be
so,
fun.
So it's one of those things, and like my grand view is eventually Louis Elsevier is my plan is eventually he'll go to Magdeburg, just because Granville's too crowded. He wants to be his family's bread and butter is academic, so obviously the Imperial College would call to him because hey, Magdeburg is filled with printers, but how many are in the Latin trade, which is what his family's bread and butter is, as well as having a name that everyone knows, at least the uptimers know. And then eventually my distant goal is to be a fun trademark battle, because obviously if the family has this mark that people know, but it's been used by an uptime company, who owns it?
Very good question. Who has primacy on that?
I hate to mention this, but I think our gentleman has forgotten to notify us on time, because
I have been watching the time.
We just got 10-minute warning. But yes. I think we started a little late, so I think we're good.
Okay.
We started at the 48 mark, so I'm at the 38 mark, so I'm watching. So Virginia, what's next for you?
Oh, I have a whole bunch of things going on. The book that's coming out now from Ring of Fire Press is an anthology of the Pastor Kastenmeier stories with 2 new ones. And this is my end with him. I have turned the Kastenmeier family over to Karen Offord now for his Gribbleflutz series, since Dina Kastenmeier married Dr. Phil, and he'll be carrying them on from here. The book after that is called Designed to Fail, and it involves the province of Westphalia, Ulrich of Denmark's brother Frederick, who was appointed governor, and his collision with Anneliese Richter, Gretchen's sister, which is interesting. I'm working on some more stories in the series on the Quiney brothers, which is my only move into England, but Shakespeare's grandsons are safely in Germany, touring with Philip Massinger's Englische Komödianten. So I don't have to worry about England. They're out of England altogether. Walt has one story, he's just gotten another one, and there's one in progress. There's a limit to what one can do with teenagers, but Shakespeare's grandsons were just too good to miss. And the next book that I'm designing will take the people who were in Legions of Pestilence and The Trouble with Huguenots and bring them together. And I'm trying to persuade Eric that since in his latest book, Mike Stearns was moaning about not having enough cavalry, and since Christian and Frederick Hendrik in the Netherlands have a retainer on Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar's cavalry, we can really have them send Mike Frost Stearns a couple of regiments of Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar's cavalry, which will allow, since he will send his good friend with them, some idiot uptimer to look and say, I never really expected to see the riders of Rohan.
Very true. I can't wait for that. That'll be fun.
So I'm trying to persuade Eric that there's a way to stick that in.
It's perfectly a period. You could do it.
Yes, I know.
What next for you? Since carrying on with humor.
Oh, me?
Yes.
Oh, well, right now I'm trying to finish putting together the Dennis and Betsy stories into an anthology for Ring of Fire Press. And so I've written a novella that's, I describe it as 10 little Indians on an island in the middle of the North Sea.
Wow.
Dennis and Betsy and Cyrano de Bergerac are trying to put out a play. It's Baroque, so it's a little too modern for French tastes at this time. And so Betsy suggests that they have a press junket. And so Cyrano gets all these very impressive muckety mucks from France and strands them on this island called Newark. And so they're stuck on this island, and then people start dying and people start blaming Cyrano. And so Dennis and Betsy have to prove that he's innocent. And it's not easy because Cyrano he's a very young man in this story. He's very precocious for his age, and he likes to insult people. So he has a talent for getting on people's bad side. So it's not easy to prove that he's innocent. And Betsy just sort of feels like he's her younger brother and she has to take care of him, and that doesn't go well at all for her. And then we have to round out this the collection with the short story, and so I've got Dennis and Betsy in and around Naples, and this is about 100 years before in the timeline that was, they would have started digging up Pompeii. And so, but it's right around the time of Lucas Holsteinus, who was the librarian for one of the cardinals down in Italy. And he was one of the men who first pointed out to the antiquarians that, you know, this might be Pompeii. It might not be, you know, somebody's, you know, villa dedicated to Hercules. This might actually be Pompeii. And then 100 years later, they start digging it up. And so Dennis and Betsy get to have some adventures with him. And so that's fun.
Okay. Well, my friends, you now know what is coming from the Women in the New Timeline, and you have a lot to look forward to, including my stuff, which will be, which is in progress, and I hope that people will enjoy that as well. Thank you very much to my esteemed fellow panelists. Thank you for participating, and I hope you enjoyed this panel.
Thank you for inviting us.